I chose to do this today because my degree is in English Language and Literature, and I am a Jane Austen fan, as others have said. I cannot claim any constituency relation to Jane Austen as the MP for North East Fife. I would suggest that if she had come, she may wanted to have gone sea bathing off the East Neuk, but she would have found it rather chilly. And as the Honourable Member for Ramsgate has also just pointed out, going to the seaside was not necessarily a safe thing for Austen's characters. Many of them came to harm by the sea. But it's clear, listening to the debate so far, that the streets and neighbours' quirks that are literally captured in Austen's writing are one of the reasons why we've heard such a varied debate today. And indeed, Walter Scott, who in 2021 we celebrated his 250th anniversary of his birth, was a Jane Austen fan and described her as having an exquisite touch which renders ordinary commonplace things and characters interesting from the truth of the description and the sentiment. One of the things I wanted to do, Mr Efford, was put Jane Austen into her historical context, and many members have already done that. But one of the things that's not been mentioned so far is the Napoleonic Wars, and I would recommend, and it's available in the House of Commons Library, the Jenny Uglow book, In These Times, Living in Britain Through the Napoleonic Wars. And that book, Mr Efford, is dated 1793 to 1815. And if we map Austen's life onto that, that means that the Napoleonic Wars started as she turned 18 and concluded only 2 years before her untimely death. Some criticism of Austen about the letters that she wrote and about some of her attitudes towards death. There's a particular one where she comments on the stillbirth of a woman known to her, basically by suggesting that the stillbirth was caused by the woman being frightened at the seeing the face of her husband, have suggested that there is a cruelness to Austen. But I would argue that it was the reality of her times. Women died in childbirth, these things happened, and from a war perspective, in many ways in her books we see the redcoats that Lydia Bennet sees in Meryton, we see the naval officers such as Captain Wentworth and his colleagues in Persuasion. They were everywhere in Britain during those times. War was a fact of life. But it also was a fact of life that, as it continued over a length of time, meant that it became part of people's day-to-day lives, and so didn't intrude on the consciousness in a way that it might be where we were experiencing something of a shorter duration. So it's part of Austen's novels, but it's not at the centre of it. And as I say, she had her own brothers in the Navy. She was heavily invested in their careers, and she did understand the peril that families would have felt with a loved one serving overseas. And I think what's interesting is that Austen, what she wrote, resonated not only with contemporaries, but has continued to resonate with generations across the 250 years since. And in 1918, as part of efforts to boost morale in the trenches, 2 of her works, Persuasion and Northanger Abbey, were selected by the War Office for the Forces Book Club and were printed in a size that would fit in soldiers' pockets. That does not suggest that it's chick lit that Austen was producing. And indeed, a hospital worker in 1915 wrote an article in the Times on their efforts to find appropriate reading that would calm the nerves of those suffering from shell shock. And it said that it happened that a tired soldier found her, Austen, just what he wanted. We found ourselves wishing that the dear lady had written at a greater length as the last page of Sense and Sensibility came. The other thing I wanted to say in relation to war was also about empire. I think one of the things that we don't necessarily recognise in Mansfield Park, for example, is it's quite clear that the Bertram family are profiting from the slave trade in the Caribbean. In relation to Bath and my honourable friend, the member for Bath, I was at Topping's bookstore in my constituency in St Andrews just last week, and they were talking about how popular the Bath celebrations for Austen's birthday were. And it is truly remarkable that a woman who only earned £631 from writing in her lifetime, £45,000 today, has gone on to create a multi-million-pound industry. But I want to do a little bit of the literature, Mr Efford. How did Austen capture so many hearts and minds? And I'm going to suggest a second book for colleagues. It's John Mullen's What Matters in Jane Austen. It's a set of 20 essays that really sort of tracks her literary genius. And indeed, it's one that I do come back to on a regular basis, not quite as regularly as reading the books herself. But John Mullen argues that Austen was a trailblazer in terms of literary ingenuity. She did things with fiction, characterisation, dialogue that had never been done before. Free and direct style in English fiction is something that we just take for granted now, and I think we underestimate how revolutionary her style was. And by filtering her plots into the consciousness of her characters, I think we really saw real people, and that's one of the reasons why her art has endured. It was the little things that mattered, the smallest of details. One of the chapters of Mullen's book talks about blushing, which in some ways seems such a small, inconsequential thing. But for Emma Woodhouse, the one Austen character who is very secure in her opinions and her confidence and her sense of self, she blushes when she is reprimanded by Mr. Knightley for her treatment of Miss Bates on Box Hill. And it's the first sign of this woman, Emma, who has been so confident in her opinions up until now, that she has got things wrong and doesn't truly know herself. Her plotting around who keeps silent in Emma turns the book into a detective novel, and I think that's one of the reasons why so many people can return to her books, because you do find something new every time. All of this shows how crafted her work was, and it's a craft that has allowed her work to be remade again and again. I'm a woman of a certain age. 1995 was quite important for me, whether it was Clueless, Persuasion, I entirely agree, and also the very well-known Pride and Prejudice. And I think the Austen Mania exhibition that I've unfortunately been unable to get to is one that would have been very, very popular. And as the Honourable Member for Basingstoke mentioned, the careers of some of our greatest stars, maybe even our Prime Minister, may have been launched through such things. But even to the inattentive reader, what is it that inspires so deep a devotion to her work? And I would argue it's because of that capturing of human follies and scruples with genuine affection and humour. And as my friend, the Honourable Member for Winchester, referenced Mr. Bennet and sport for neighbours and laughing them at a turn, I have to say, Mr. Bennet, I think the 1995 production fooled us all. Mr. Bennet's a pretty neglectful dad. Isn't he really? How did he end up with 5 daughters and 2,000 a year and not able to provide for them? I do think he's got a bit to answer for. But towards the end of that story, Elizabeth reflects that Darcy had yet to learn to be laughed at, and we, the readers, do understand that under her tutelage, he will learn that. And we also learn to laugh at Darcy a little ourselves, because Austen's ironies attract us still, but her balance and poise often elude imitators. But whilst laughing at foolishness is a good way to get by, it isn't ultimately the salve that brought comfort to the soldier in the trenches or to an admiral's family. To quote Beatrice Scudler, if her novels prove that moral corruption is ubiquitous, they also make the case that despite our corrupted nature, we're not unsalvable. Forgiveness and redemption are always within reach of humankind. Because from Emma to Anne Elliot to Mr. Darcy, to confront their mistakes is a powerful factor for her characters in how they grow. I think it's one of the reasons why Fanny Price is often one of the least popular characters, because she is always good and always right. And although that is a very nice way to live, it sometimes makes you slightly insufferable to live with. And for Anne Elliot, also my favourite, I think her failing is that she hasn't been headstrong enough, which is often not a problem for other heroines of Austen. Austen's most powerful innovation was to realise a lack of self-knowledge, and that is the very voice of narration. Her dialogue is the king of her works. The comic characters are monologuists, whereas our heroes, Emma, Mr. Knightley, they are supreme in their dialogue. Also look out for the significant characters who are never heard from, don't actually speak, because they are interesting too. But to conclude, Mr. Efford, in an age where it is less and less common to call on our neighbours and to know those follies and scruples, where the ridiculousness of Miss Bates would have potentially meant that Emma's hot takes went viral on social media, as politicians, it does us good to be reminded that community requires compassion.